In this edition of Locked On Capitals, it is a special crossover edition as I am joined by Locked On Flyers as we talk about the future and the plans of the Flyers and the Capitals next on this edition of Locked On Capitals.
Locked On Capitals, your daily podcast on the Washington Capitals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Well, hello and welcome into this edition of Locked On Capitals. I'm so glad you decided to join me today. As always, this podcast is free and available on all the major platforms, and I want to thank you for making this your first listen or view of the day. Yes, this podcast is also available in video form, so head on over to YouTube and check it out. And when you're on YouTube, make sure and hit that subscribe button, and if you like the videos, hit the thumbs up button. It really helps grow the channel. My name is Dan Holme. You can find me on Twitter. It's at DanCaps218. You can find the show on Twitter. It's at Locked On Caps. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. So in this episode, that is what we're going to do. I'm going to talk with the Flyers and talk about what their future is and what is the future plans of the Capitals. We'll talk about that next.
All right. So, continuing our series of checking in with some of our friends in the Metro division, we are thrilled to welcome to the show from Locked On Capitals, Dan Holme. Welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So, Dan, heading into this offseason, what were the biggest issues that the Caps were facing, and how do you think they did overall?
I mean, I think that Brian McClellan swung for the fences. I kind of criticized him on my podcast all season long, saying, why didn't you do something with the netminding situation? We take a look at this Washington Capitals team, this rock the red era, if you will, of Alex Ovechkin. And we know that we have a limited time with him on this team. So it kind of seemed like they squandered these last 2 years with kind of inconsistency in net in the form of Vitek Vanacek and Ilya Samsonov. But he went out and he solidified the netminding situation, getting Darcy, Kuemper, and Charlie Lindgren. I don't think you can go out and get a bigger netminder than Darcy Kuemper, on paper anyway. I think he's going to be a great netminder. You take a look at the injuries that the Capitals face with Tom Wilson. The Capitals got Connor Brown, and then they got Dylan Strome to take Nick Backstrom's spot. Nick Backstrom has that hip resurfacing procedure that was done. And just honestly, it's the outcome on that doesn't look that great. I'm keeping my fingers crossed that he will be able to come back, but I feel positive that they got Dylan Strome and that Brian McClellan, the GM, was so active to take care of all the holds in the lineup.
Yeah, I think he did, and I think for the most part you'll be happy with Kuemper. He's going to have moments where you're not going to be happy with him, but if the defense is there to help him, he'll be good. But you mentioned Tom Wilson, and last year Brett Leeson filled the role, and he's not the same player, but he's the same size. He's got some offensive ability. Do you anticipate early in the year he's going to fill that same role?
Yeah, I mean, I think Connor Brown could fill that line. He could also play on the second line right wing. There's another guy in Hershey, Beck Malenstein as well, a big frame that I think would fit in there as well. I think that, like what Brian McClellan said, is just because you think you know where these players are going to go, that doesn't necessarily mean where they're going to end up going. These players are going to have to fight for their jobs. There's guys on the Capitals, Connor McMichael, that's going to fight for his job as playing a center. Also defensively, if you take a look at it, Lucas Johansson and Alex Alexiev when he comes back from his surgery. So I think that the team is sketched out in a certain way, but what actuality will be after the training camp might be something completely different.
Well, since I was going to ask you about McMichael, I'm assuming Strome is going to play higher in the lineup, at least to start. Where does that leave McMichael? Like a 3C, 4C spot? Is that what it is?
Yeah, so the interesting thing there is that Lars Eller, everyone was talking about it, and I talked about it in my podcast, that it was probably his last year on the Capitals. And then we had that bombshell dropped that Nick Backstrom is going to be out for a long period. And all of a sudden, Lars Eller became a little bit more relevant. So I think it's going to be a battle for that third line. If it's going to be Lars Eller or Connor McMichael, I know that Connor McMichael generally likes to play on the wing, but these young guys are kind of a Swiss Army knife. They'll play wherever you need them, essentially. But I think that, Lars Eller's production has seen a dip. So I think that is going to be, a battle there. I think that the fourth line is going to be pretty much solidified. If they get Hagelin coming back, you got Dowd and Hathaway, kind of that snarl line out there, if you will. I think that they got great production from the fourth line. So I don't think they're going to want to tinker with that one too much. Sorry, I believe your mic is muted there.
I was just wondering where Dylan Strome goes then in that lineup.
Dylan Strome is ostensibly going to be the second line center. Evgeny Kuznetsov is, generally speaking, the top line center. But, every once in a while, if Nick Backstrom comes back, if they're looking for that great goal-scoring touch, it's about putting Backstrom and Ovechkin on the same line together. You could make the argument that Alex Ovechkin, who will one day be the best goal scorer of all time, I really do believe, I don't think that he would have reached that level if it wasn't for someone like Nick Backstrom serving him them passes to his office at the left circle there.
I'll fight that. I don't think he's going to catch Gretzky, but I think he'll have a big number at the end. That's okay. Also, you were mentioning Lucas Johansson. I don't know if I would exactly count on him, but with the guys that the Caps have on defense, I have to say I think Dmitry Orlov is probably one of the more underrated defensemen in the league. He just kind of never gets talked about.
Yeah, and he has some great offensive upside to him as well.
Yep.
And just a really a big tough guy out there. Alan May, who covers the Washington Capitals, said, you guys think you know who the tough guy is, but you should see Dmitry Orlov out there. He's got legs like tree trunks out there. So he has that offensive upside, and he brings a real physical aspect to the game, like a lot of the other Russians do on the team as well.
You mentioned Beck Malenstein, who is somebody that we've seen quite a bit watching Phantoms games up against Hershey. And I'm just wondering if, in addition to him, there's any other top prospects in the system or Hershey guys that could crack the lineup.
Yeah, so it's going to be interesting there. You have Leeson, you have Protas, Malenstein, like I talked about. There's that Vecchione as well. A lot of these guys, Hendrix Lapierre, I can't overlook Hendrix Lapierre, kind of the crown jewel in the Washington Capitals organization, a guy that played on juniors primarily last year, but had a brief stint with the Washington Capitals in the beginning of the season. But I think that Hendrix Lapierre will end up playing in Hershey. I do think that, Leeson and Protas and a lot of these guys are going to fight to get their jobs. I think that, like I say, that Strome and Connor Brown are there, but that doesn't mean, that one of these big guys, one of these young guys couldn't come in and take the job from them. And then if you also take a look at net, just kind of fanning out and widening the lens a little bit there as well, is you take a look at Charlie Lindgren, a guy that's a bit of an unproven commodity. He played really well for St. Louis and in their farm team there as well. But the Capitals have someone else in Hershey in the form of Zach Fucale. I was a bit surprised that they didn't go with him. They could have got him on the cheap, and just a really solid netminder. Had 3 shutouts back-to-back for Hershey and was lights out the time he did play with the Capitals. But I think that, a lot like the Washington Capitals, you take a look at the Pittsburgh Penguins and the Boston Bruins, aging rosters, I think you're going to see changes over time. But certain promises were made to Alex Ovechkin that he would stay on a competitive team. So you're not going to see these wholesale changes until after the Alex Ovechkin era, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think they are doing everything they can to keep Ovi. I think the thing with Fucale is he's had such a sojourn since his draft, but Lindgren's bigger, right? I think they're looking for that backup to be bigger, probably. Just to be on the safe side in case Kuemper, has issues. That's just my feeling. I don't know if that's the way they're going, but also look.
All right, so after the break, we are going to continue to talk with Locked On Flyers as we talk about the future of the Capitals and the Flyers and what their plans are. But first, betonline.net is the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your betting needs. Find all your favorite sports and events at the #1 online source for odds, lines, and games. Find reviews and news of every league, including Major League Baseball, NFL, NBA, NHL, combat sports, esports, and even golf. And guys, if you haven't been over to BetOnline yet, what are you waiting for? It makes watching the games that much more exciting. BetOnline continues to be the top online resource for all your sports wagering information, from live in-game betting, scores, and podcasts. They have you covered. Head to BetOnline today or use your mobile device to learn more about the action happening today. Bet Online, where the game starts.
Looking at the Capitals, TJ Oshie is a guy that, has gotten tougher over the years, but his scoring has dipped. I feel like without Backstrom now, and I don't think Backstrom will be back this year anyhow, just to kind of throw that out there. I know this injury has derailed almost every hockey player it's happened to, but Backstrom's a different guy, so maybe, he can come back at some point, but I think Oshie has to really step up here if the Caps want to really do anything.
Yeah, and here's the deal with TJ Oshie is that he plays much bigger than he is. He's not the biggest guy on the ice, but don't tell him that. He'll take on some of the biggest guys out there. You are correct, though. He did see a dip in his goal scoring there a bit. But I do think, Father Time is coming for us all, and that is kind of what they're talking about there is that aging roster. You take a look at Lars Eller and just a lot of the guys out there that aren't seeing quite the level of performance that they had at one time. But I do think that they do need to see TJ Oshie in top form. He is a really great playmaker and just a great all-around athlete in general. If you look back to his days in War Road, he was a great football player, just a really an all-around great guy, and not just a great hockey player, but I think just a real positive presence in the locker room as well. He's always quick to put a positive spin on thing, and he's not, always taking a dip into the doldrums if the Capitals aren't doing that well.
I think another guy on that list is Carlson, who's getting up there, and I think that's, for me, one of the bigger, I think, weaknesses for the Caps right now is the blue line. How do you look at it?
Yeah, so I mean, they did lose Schultz in the offseason here, and I think that, they didn't get really quite the production out of him that they had hoped for. I mean, I think that he played okay, but to answer your question about John Carlson, he still, I think, at the end of the day, will be considered at the end of his career as one of the better defensemen on the Washington Capitals, just a really kind of a workhorse out there. He doesn't miss a lot of time because of injury. And but yeah, you're right. He is getting a bit up there and older, and I think that is where these younger players fit in. If you take a look at Martin Feravari, a guy that was slated to make the big team until the Capitals got Chara, and then he had to kind of be patient and wait one more year, but has just doing a really great job with the Washington Capitals, kind of brings a big physical game. And, that's the one thing I notice about a lot of these younger guys, the defensemen, is they have a lot of offensive upside as well. They're not just these stay-at-home defensemen, if you will.
Yeah, the other thing is what's also taken a dip and is sort of in the middle of the league is their power play. And look, Carlson's still great. I think the world of John Carlson and Ovechkin, but they are going to need, especially without Backstrom now, more catalysts on the power play, because I feel like that it should be better than what it was last year.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. And they are missing some big pieces out there. I know that around the league, Tom Wilson is seen as this goon, as this tough guy, but not a lot of goons score 20-plus goals. Ryan Reeves, I'm talking to you out there. So I know that he's a guy that everyone loves to hate, but that's
I don't hate Tom Wilson. Actually, I'll be honest. I like Tom Wilson. I interviewed him pre-draft. He's a terrific athlete. He's a fun guy. I interview him all the time. I happen to like him. It's just that we all know he gets a little carried away. He does.
He does. I mean, and, he does play, high emotion. And I think that, he's a tough guy. So it just kind of comes in his nature to be a tough guy. And, sometimes to his detriment. That's why he's been suspended multiple times and that kind of thing. But, they're getting that production out there. Kuznetsov was in the top 3 goal scorer out there, number 2 on the Washington Capitals. Evgeny Kuznetsov was one of those interesting players the year before, was on the trading block. And
right.
Tarek Eric Eldashir, who covers the Capitals for The Athletic, they said, they would love to trade Kuznetsov, but they won't get enough for him. And, it's good on Brian McClellan and, maybe just fate or whatever you want to call it, that they were patient and they waited that one more year, because I think that he saw a level of maturity out there that was, lacking before. That was, a Kuznetsov that had some personal issues, shall we say, in his free time and got into, some COVID activity with some of the other Russians, Ilya Samsonov and Alex Ovechkin and the like out there. So I just think that, a lot of these players are starting to come into their own and getting some great goal scoring. But, when you do have Nick Backstrom and some of these integral players out of the lineup, you're going to need to see some of these younger players step up and fill those roles.
Yeah, I think so. It's really interesting looking at the Caps and Pens with them being such a huge rivalry, but at the same time, they're in sort of similar situations with an aging core that they're trying to keep together for the superstars, right? And I'm just wondering how you see like the comparison between those two teams right now.
I mean, I do see a lot of the same things. You take a look at Crosby and Malkin and Letang, and those guys have been together for some time. And I do think to a certain extent that Penguins team is kind of going through a similar thing that the Capitals are going through. They are a little bit scared to make changes because this is the Washington Capitals team that won the Stanley Cup in 2018, and you don't want to kind of offset the chemistry too much. And you take a look at the Penguins, and they had quite a bit of success with Crosby and Malkin and Letang and the likes of those guys out there. So I think it's a bit of the same thing out there. I did do an episode where I talked about that it would have been a good idea for Malkin to come to the Washington Capitals. Our mutual friend Sean Woodley thought that was a good idea to kind of stir the pot there, if you will. But
I might have mentioned that about the Flyers as well. But
yeah, I mean, I think that would have been interesting, but he is kind of always prone to the injury bug out there as well. But you take a look at the Bruins, you take a look at the Capitals and the Penguins. They're all an aging roster that is staring change straight in the face. It's going to happen sooner or later. I just don't think it's going to be, kind of like what the Rangers did a few years ago. If you take a look at what the Rangers had out on the ice, it was one of those teams out there that they were getting no success out there. And it was a rough year and a half out there. But now take a look at the Rangers. They kind of went through some big changes and, they made a pretty solid push into the playoffs. So if the Capitals, or one of these other teams, the Penguins or the Bruins, if they could kind of emulate that a little bit, I think that going forward, that's a positive sign.
Yeah, for me, and I'm okay with Kuemper. For me, the biggest thing on the Capitals is, getting Dylan Strome to fill this role. He's not the fastest guy. He does have good hands. He does have ability. But when he was putting up big points, he had Patrick Kane next to him. And so it does make me wonder how far the Caps are going to go to try and get him to succeed without sort of really messing with their lineup too much, because it could go the other way too.
Yeah, I mean, I think that they are going to. I mean, he's also can play winged as well. So if it just turns out that he's not getting that production, then I think that they're going to look at what their other options are, in the form of a Connor McMichael out there. But I would say that the one bugaboo or the one thing that the Washington Capitals had with their younger players, I was talking about with one of the beat writers for the Washington Capitals, is it wasn't sustainable. A lot of these young players that they worked into the lineup, they had flashes of greatness, but then they kind of dried off. So what you need is these young players to step up and sustain that goal scoring touch. Like you talked about with Dylan Strome. I mean, he's going to get, somewhat of a long leash, but if he's not getting that production, they're going to try to work someone else into that spot as well. And I think that would be good for some of the younger players as well.
Mm-hmm.
So when all is said and done, where do you think the Caps end up in the standings for the division?
I mean, I would like to say that I don't know if they're going to win the President's Trophy, but I do think that they should finish towards the top. If you take a look at the Capitals this season, they had 100 points. And generally speaking, if you take a look around the different divisions, that may have put you on the very top. But the Metro is a very competitive division. I mean, you guys know that as well. And so I think that they should finish near the top as long as they can get all these pieces to fit together. You take a look at some of these teams and you sketch it out on paper and you look at it and you go, yeah, that looks like a pretty good lineup. But, you take a look at the Edmonton Oilers, for example. That is an all-star team out there. You got Nugent Hopkins and Draisaitl, and but they can't get the goaltending and they can never put it together. So if you take a look at the Washington Capitals, as long as the stars align and if you put all those pieces in the pot and it makes a nice casserole, then I think the Washington Capitals will be in a good position to do great things. I would like to say that they're going to make a push into the playoffs. My goal for them is to make a push at least into the second round, because the Capitals won in 2018. And after that, they have not made it past the first round. That should be their goal. I mean, obviously, I'd like a Stanley Cup, but even to make it past the first round, I think would be a good feeling.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I think that's a really good goal for them to have. I don't know if they'll get there. I think it's going to be an interesting race in the division overall, and I think the Caps should, in theory, be in the top three. But if the stars don't align properly, they could be on the outside looking in just because of the numbers game in the division.
Yeah, I mean, I think they got a lot better. There's a lot of teams out there that got a lot better. I mean, if you want to take a look at the Flames, for example, or you take a look at what Florida, I don't know if that's going to end up working out for them. And then Columbus getting Johnny Gaudreau out there. There's a lot of teams out there that potentially could be, just great teams. But if you want to kind of switch gears a little bit, I'm a big fan of the Washington Nationals, and they lost two big players to the San Diego Padres. Guess what? That didn't help that team. So sometimes things that are sketched out, they seem good, but in actuality, they're really not that great. But so the Capitals, I look at them on paper, it looks good. If that translates into actuality, that's another thing altogether.
Yeah, I think they're going to struggle to get past the Canes and the Rangers, but then I think they'll be in the mix.
Yeah, that's for sure. And of course, we got the Flyers as well. We'll talk about that, I'm sure, here a little bit later in the show. But
Yep.
some big changes going on out there. All right, so after the break, we are going to continue to talk with Locked On Flyers. What are their projections for their team, and what are my projections for the Washington Capitals? But first, you're hanging out with some friends and putting back a few drinks, and a few becomes a few too many. As the evening comes to an end and people start to head out, you think of calling for a ride, but nah, you live nearby, you can make it home okay. It's no big deal. What are the odds you'll get pulled over anyways? And even so, what's the worst thing that could happen? Your insurance goes up, you lose your license, you lose your job, your car, you kill someone? Everyone knows about the risks of driving drunk. The results are tragic and often deadly. However, that still doesn't stop everyone from getting behind the wheel under the influence. That's why police officers are out there right now looking for impaired drivers on our roads to save lives. So if you think you're okay to drive after a few drinks, think again. Play it safe and plan ahead to get a ride. It only takes one mistake to change your life or someone else's forever. Drive sober or get pulled over.
Yeah, Dan, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us about the Caps. And where can people find you out there?
All right, so you can find me on Twitter. It's at DanCaps218. You can find the show on Twitter. It's at Locked On Caps. And then, of course, you can find the show wherever you find your podcasts, including YouTube. So when you're on YouTube, make sure and hit that subscribe button. And if you like the videos, hit the thumbs up button. It really helps grow the channel. Okay, so just taking a look at what you guys have. The Flyers finished 25-46. What is the outlook for 2022-23? I know that, the netminding situation for the Flyers has kind of been one of the Achilles heel for that team as well. You got Carter Hart on that team. What is your outlook for the Flyers going forward?
I'll let Rachel go first, then I can go.
I think that is the $64,000 question. I may be dating myself with that dollar amount there, but I think that it could go one of two ways, right? Because with the hire of John Tortorella, there's going to be some natural improvement, I think, because he runs a really structured game out there with his system, very defensively focused, very shot blocky. And so I think that in terms of the goals allowed, he will be working to minimize that. And I think that was obviously a big problem. And he recognizes that Carter Hart did not have a lot of help in front of him last year, especially. And so he's looking to fix that. And I think he will to some degree. And I think that on the other hand, there were not a lot of changes made in this offseason. The couple of pickups they made are, on the defensive side, it was Tony DeAngelo, except he's known as an offensive defenseman and his defense is questionable. And then the offensive pickup was Nick Delorier, who's a fourth line kind of goonish player. And so there wasn't really anything on the goal scoring side of things. So I think that there'll be a lot of, depending on some of the younger kids and people to take a step up from what they did last year. So, again, it could go either way here.
Yeah, I'll say that, and I'll mimic the coach that, yeah, the standard will get raised, but there hasn't been much change on the team, like Rachel said. And I don't think they're going to get that many more points in the standings. Maybe they get like 5-7 more wins because it would be hard to be worse. But, in the end, I think early on, Tortorella is going to be frustrated. And I don't think the answer is to just load up on tough guys so the fans stay entertained because we're going to have 1 or 2 fights a game. That may have worked in the old days. It'll work to some degree if they're down 3-0. Sure, fans will cheer on a fight, but it's not going to get you a lot of points in the standings.
So one of the crazy ideas out there, I was doing a little bit of research on your team, is do you think that the Flyers should tank on purpose to get Connor Bedard, who is lauded as being the #1 draft pick next season? It's kind of a crazy idea, but one of the beat writers for the Flyers out there thought that was an interesting idea. What are your thoughts on the Flyers tanking on purpose?
I mean, I could give you a quick answer, then I'll let Rachel go. I don't think it's smart because Arizona's got like 20 games on the road because of their new arena, similar to like what the Islanders went through last year. So they're going to be in the forefront of tanking even without trying. I think even if the Flyers were to tank, and of course the coach wouldn't let them, I don't think they'd even be in the tanking race. I don't think they're in the tanking race, and I don't think they're in the playoff race.
Yeah, because I've seen mixed results with that. I think the Ottawa Senators did that. It almost seemed like they were tanking for a while, but you take a look also at the Buffalo Sabres, and it doesn't matter how bad they tank or what draft pick they get, they just can't put wins together in that city, and it's too bad because they have a fan base that really loves them. But just taking a look, there are some bright spots on your lineup, some younger players. Joel Farabee comes to mind, 22 years old, 6 foot, 164, drafted number 14 in 2018. What is your projections for Joel Farabee going forward?
Well, he is injured right now, and so it's looking like he won't start the season. I'm guessing maybe 3-4 weeks into the season is probably the earliest we'll see him out there. But that being said, I think that in the right situation, he could really take a big step forward. I think he's really starting to recognize the kind of role he can play on the team and earn top line minutes. And if he does that, I think, and on a line potentially with a healthy Sean Couturier, I think that would be a really good situation for him to be in.
Yeah, since we say everything potentially in regard to health with the Flyers, like everything, I'll just say that I think Rachel's right. Farabee is definitely a top line talent. I think you might be talking about 65, 70 points. I don't know if he'll get much more than that in his best year, but he's a really good player.
So what are your thoughts on Ryan Ellis, the 31-year-old defenseman was acquired from Nashville? It doesn't seem like, and Tortorella kind of had some disparaging comments about him. What are your thoughts on Ryan?
I mean, I think John said what he said because the whole world knows he's not starting the season. So I think he just wanted to say the obvious because the GM's not. John seems to be the lead on this right now. So based on that, I think once training camp opens, sometime during training camp, I don't even know if we'll see Ryan Ellis at camp other than to get his physical. And I expect him to start the season on the LTIR.
Yeah, just the whole Ryan Ellis question has kind of been a running bit on our show in terms of like, what's going on with Ryan Ellis now? Do we even know? Are they going to tell us? And so I think Russ is right that, we just heard from John Tortorella finally, because it's just kind of been almost nothing out of management.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm just taking a look at your team, and it can only get better from here. And kind of in my closing here, I'm going to say that I think that the Flyers are in a pretty good position. I think that the Flyers went out and they got a great coach. It's a bit of a polarizing thing to say. Either you love or you hate John Tortorella. I talked about in my podcast that I actually really like him as a coach. I think he gets results. Not so much in the long term. And, there was a lot of people that talked about that this current Flyers team is somewhat similar to the Columbus team that he left not too long ago. But if you can take a look at Columbus, he got some pretty good years out of the Blue Jackets there. If he can kind of just take that Flyers team and push them in the right direction, I think that, just as an outsider, I know you guys cover this team on a daily basis, but I think that, in a couple of years, I think that they could be a fairly decent team. What are your thoughts on the Flyers going forward? I'm thinking, just taking a look at, the pieces that they're putting together, 2-3 years, maybe even less, or what is your projections for this team so they're sitting in a good position?
That's another running kind of bit in Flyers land, is like, we're 2 years away from being 2 years away. And I think that, this year is going to be really interesting. There's a lot of questions going into this year, especially with the injuries and some of the injury history. The backup goaltender situation is a little messy because of Ivan Fedotov getting drafted into the Russian army and isn't coming over. So, I think that, again, I really think it could go either way here. There could be a moderate improvement, like Russ was talking about, that won't lead anywhere. So it won't get you like a top 5 pick, and it won't get you into the playoffs. Or things could go very, very horribly. I think those are like the two options here.
Yeah, I don't think they're in danger of this year beating the 74-75 caps for futility, but I think they'll probably be worse than the Metro, worst or second worst. I do think they're potentially good in 2 years, but that's only potentially if at least 3 of the guys that we mentioned are healthy. Like I can't even project you 2 years down the line because I have no idea what their health is going to be to start the season.
Thank you for making Locked On Capitals your first listen every day. Now make your second listen Locked On NHL. Locked On experts give you a daily 30-minute podcast on all things NHL all year long. Stay up to date on everything in the hockey world. Locked On NHL, your daily 30-minute NHL podcast. And once again, thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals. My name is Dan Holme, and you can find this podcast on Locked On Capitals, where it's your team every day. So once again, thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, and I'll talk to you next time.